I am Patsy and I'm the programmer here at the Linen Hall, and I'm delighted to welcome Siobhán Doyle here to talk to us about telling GAA stories through objects. And Siobhán's going to be exploring some fascinating GAA objects and their stories that she uncovered while researching and writing her book, A History of the GAA in 100 Objects. And that book is available at the back of the room. Delighted we have David from the Wallabies here to sell books. So you're a great supporter of the library, so it's always great to have him here. And I say Siobhán's going to be talking to us about the challenges and the charms of telling stories through objects, and how even the most ordinary everyday objects can tell remarkable stories. She's brilliantly qualified for that job. She's a curator in the National Museum of Ireland. She has a PhD in museum studies from the Technological University in Dublin, and she's interested in Irish history, sports history, sociology, and material culture. As I say, her first book was published by Merrion and is available here today. And she is currently working on the difficult second book, A History of Irish Sport in 100 Objects, which will be published in the autumn of 2025. So keep a lookout for that. But in the meantime, she's here to talk to us today about GAA objects. So I'd like to welcome her to the stage.
Thank you, Patsy, and thanks to the team here at Linen Hall, Melissa and David from No Alibis for the very warm welcome. It's my first time in Linen Hall, so delighted to be here. And it's no coincidence that my talk coincides with Wexford playing Antrim tomorrow afternoon. A staunch Wexford woman, so I was very cute in arranging this talk to coincide with that weekend. As Patsy said, in October 2022, Merrion Press published my first book, A History of the GAA in 100 Objects, and that was my COVID project. But I suppose all throughout my career and my studies, I was always interested in ordinary everyday objects telling much bigger stories, and objects just being a springboard for people to tell their stories and ignite their memories. And there's lots of 100 objects books. So there's the World Cup in 100 objects, there's American sport in 100 objects, History of Ireland in 100 objects. I couldn't believe that nobody had come to the GAA in 100 objects. Lots of people had thought of it, but never quite got to getting around to doing the book. So I was thrilled to be the first one to get there. As Patsy mentioned, I work in the National Museum of Ireland, so I work with objects all of the time. And even though this book came out in 2022, I started researching it in 2020. The seeds of this book were sown a very long time ago. Why isn't that working? I'll just use the thing. Yeah, the seeds of the book were. No, it's all right. No, it's all right. Yeah. Okay. Seeds of the book were sown a long time ago in County Wexford. So that's me at age 3 or 4, proudly waving the purple and gold with the May bush behind me. I was brought up in, I suppose, what you call a GAA household, but I suppose have a very unremarkable relationship with the GAA, but a very deep one, in that I suppose our weekends are dictated by what matches are on or where. Our dinner times are dictated by what time the matches are on. You know, we've no all-stars in our house. We have no amazing achievements, but I'm very grateful that the GAA honestly brings us together as a family, and drives us apart because my mother's from Kilkenny. But I honestly, there's no other way. I see my siblings and my father at the matches every week or every second week otherwise. Yeah, I'm grateful to the GAA for bringing those family connections much stronger. I worked before I came to the National Museum, I studied museum studies in Technological University Dublin. And previous to that, I worked in the GAA Museum in Croke Park. And that's pretty much where the book started. And this is the object that ignited it all. And these are a pair of glasses owned by a woman called Annie Burke. She was from County Sligo, and she attended the Dublin and Tipperary football match on the 21st November 1920, a day also known as Bloody Sunday. And that was a day of enormous significance within the War of Independence, when Crown forces entered Croke Park during a football match and opened fire. And with events like that, when there's fatalities, the trauma of it is often just measured by the amount of people that died or the injuries. And sometimes we overlook the people that survived, where the memories still live on and the trauma still lives on. And this is a pair of glasses that Annie wore to that match in 1920. And the day of the match, she put the glasses away in this case and she never wore them again. And almost 100 years later, her granddaughter donated those glasses to the GAA Museum in Croke Park. So it's a very powerful object, and to look at, a pair of glasses, how can that be connected with the GAA? But to me, it's such a powerful piece of evidence of that day. So I suppose that's one of the objects that kicked it all off. So during my research, I travelled to every county in Ireland, and there's lots of museums and libraries and pubs that I visited that have lots of memorabilia and souvenirs of the GAA. But in almost every county in Ireland, there's a private collector, usually a middle-aged man that has a spare room in their house or a garage where they do their own collecting of newspapers and memorabilia and match programs and footballs and photographs. And these people are of the GAA are so lucky to have them, because they're collecting in ways that museums and libraries don't, and they're doing it purely from their own personal passions. And this is the collection of a man called Paddy Flanagan. He was president of Leinster GAA for some time. He was based in Mullingar in Westmeath. He was a player, he was a referee, administrator, and he died in 2022, and he left behind an enormous archive of GAA that would have been lost only for him. And there's lots of, as I said, there's lots of those collectors around the country. And I know for a fact that they have researchers and journalists regularly contacting them to see, can you check in that match programme who was playing halfback that day, because the information in many instances would be lost otherwise. So I suppose I'd like to see the GAA give people like Paddy and those collecting up and down the country some form of formal recognition, because those people were my bread and butter when I was doing the research as well. And every single one of them, when they were asked, opened their homes and their archives to me, and couldn't have been more helpful. So I think we need to be a bit more to appreciate those collections that aren't formal. So I'll take you on a whirlwind tour of some of the objects from the book. I'll try to do it in chronological order. So the GAA itself was established on the 1st of November in 1884 in Thurles in County Tipperary. But we do know that Gaelic games were played a long, long time before that, and this hair hurling ball is evidence of that. There's about 10 of these in the collection of the National Museum of Ireland. There's others dotted around local museums around the country. They're made of cow hair and matted horse hair, and this particular one has been carbon dated to the 15th century. So it's of enormous historical and archaeological significance, because it gives us tangible evidence that our games predate the formal establishment of the GAA itself. And most of them are actually found in bogland areas, so it's actually the condition of the soil that has maintained them. So fascinating pieces of GAA history. This is one of the earliest rule books of the GAA. So when the GAA was established, they found it difficult to formalise the rules because you had lots of local teams playing each other, and then suddenly when you expand it across county boundaries, and they're all playing to different rules. So the GAA was trying to formalise the rules, and they produced this rule book in 1888. They sold it, I think, for 1 shilling, but they also published it in newspapers to try and get the rules as widespread as possible. There were 13 rules in this book. Obviously, there's a lot more since and many changes since. And some of the rules are a little bit different than the ones that we're familiar with today. So today there's 15 players on a GAA team. In 1888, you could have up to 21 players. So there's 42 players on a pitch. Today there's 70 minutes in a match. They allowed 120 minutes. So the matches were 2 hours long. You could also, there was also a rule that any 2 players could have a fight. That they could kick, box, punch, poke, bite, do whatever they like. That was fine. That was grand. But if a third player got involved, the third player got a straight red card. They could argue that still happens today, but yeah, that's just and I'm not sure how often the rule book is republished. I suppose it depends on what changes are made at Congress and that. But with every publishing of the new rule book, the previous one is retired. So there's quite the catalogue of rule books at this stage. Inevitably, with a project about sports memorabilia, there's going to be lots of trophies and medals available. So it took me quite some time to whittle down to the most interesting ones, but this is certainly one of those. These are the Croke Challenge Cups, named after Archbishop Thomas Croke, who was the first patron of the GAA, and he used his position as a member of the clergy to preach off the altar and encourage people to join and to support the GAA. And in the 1890s, he donated these trophies to the GAA. The one on the left, which you can see is in lovely condition, was used for the hurling tournament, and that's currently in the GAA Museum in Croke Park. The one on the right-hand side was used for the football tournament, and up to a couple of years ago, that had been used as a flower pot. It went into, I don't know whether it was the wrong hands, but certainly hands that weren't aware of its historical significance. And an antique stealer from County Clare spotted it one day being used as a flower pot in a private home, and salvaged it, and it's now in his care. So I suppose as a historian, as a curator, I often worry about the things that are in people's houses and people's attics, without people knowing the true significance of them. So there's lots of stories all over houses across Ireland that are just waiting to be uncovered. This is another interesting one. It's from my own county in Wexford, who were the first team to win 4 All-Irelands in a row from, I want to say 15 to 18, might be wrong. Anyway, it was in the 1910s. And one of the players on that team was a man called Aidan Doyle. He's from New Ross in County Wexford. And he was a very devout man, and he went to Mass every day in the Augustinian Church in New Ross. And in 1968, as he was getting older, he decided to donate his All-Ireland medals to the Augustinians. So what they did is they got their best gold chalice and embedded his 4 medals into the base of the chalice. And when Aidan died a couple of years later, his obituary in the newspaper reminded people of his medals in the gold chalice, and every time that it was used at Mass, that you're to remember Aidan and that great Wexford team. Aidan wasn't the only All-Ireland winner to donate his medals to the Catholic Church. Christy Ring donated his 8th All-Ireland medal to the Augustinian Church in Cork. He used to go to Mass every day in Washington Street in the city. But they also put his medal into a chalice, but they melted it down first. So Christy Ring's 8th All-Ireland medal is no longer a medal. It's in a chalice, but it's melted down, which is a real shame. So I suppose just be careful where you leave your All-Ireland medals, to be honest. I know he meant well, as did the Augustinians, but from a material culture point of view, that medal is gone. It's never to be seen again, which is a real shame. Rounders is often an overlooked sport within the GAA. It's played in different pockets around the country, but during the Irish Revolution, it was quite often played in prisons, because of course you don't need that much space to play rounders and limited equipment as well. So there was a woman called Sheila Humphreys who was imprisoned in Kilmainham jail during the Irish Revolution, and by all accounts of her fellow prisoners, she was a great woman to boost morale among her prisoners, and she organised different plays and activities, including rounders matches. And of course, we've limited resources in prison, so she fashioned this rounders bat from the leg of a chair. So you have to make do with what you have. So that's in the collections of Kilmainham Jail Museum, and it's on display there. A little bit closer to where we are, this is a sideline flag from Ballykinler internment camp in County Down. And again, this isn't a sideline flag really. I should have done the heading as a handkerchief. So it was a handkerchief that was fashioned into a sideline flag. And Gaelic games were often played in Ballykinler, again with limited resources. So we see kind of the recycling of objects from a handkerchief to a sideline flag. And the designs on it were done by a man called Joseph Bracken, who was interned there for some time. And he did lots of drawings and illustrations of Ballykinler internment camp. So again, another fascinating object. I've been doing a bit of research on the Tailteann Games over the last couple of weeks, because on the 9th of May in the National Museum of Ireland, we're going to host a seminar to mark 100 years since the first Tailteann Games. And these were to be Ireland's answer to the Olympics. And they happened 3 times in 1924, 1928 and 1932. And the whole idea was to show Ireland in a positive light on the international stage. So there was lots of different competitions, not just sport. There was chess, there was singing, there was music and dance, and lots of different activities, mostly around Dublin and in Croke Park. There was actually a marathon that started in Navan and finished in Croke Park. It's a really fascinating event to look into. The swimming events actually took place in the hippopotamus pool in Dublin Zoo. So they really had to make do with what they had. But this Tailteann Games medal was won by a man called Ivan Steadman, and he was an Australian that had just won silver for swimming in the Paris Olympics, and he dropped over to Dublin while he was in the area, and he won 3 medals at the Tailteann Games. This is the gold one that he won for swimming. And Ivan used his swimming skills not only competitively, but when he was in World War I, he saved a British soldier's life by saving him from a river. So this is the medal that he won at the Tailteann Games. By the way, Tailteann Games medals aren't hard to find. They were quite easy to win, as in there was about maybe 5,000 competitors and 2,000 medals, so the odds were good. So apologies if you do have your granddad's Tailteann Games medal at home, and it's very, of course, it's very precious to individuals, but there's lots of them knocking around. This one ended up in the Australian Sports Museum in Melbourne, so it's fascinating to see these objects and how far away they end up from the places they were won. This looks like nothing. It's a ticket to an All-Ireland final, but the whole idea of what I do is try to show the different layers to objects, and to look at it's not very fascinating, but when we delve deeper we find out a bit more. And this is an All-Ireland hurling final ticket between Cork and Kilkenny, and that took place on Sunday the 3rd of September 1939, which is also the day that World War II broke out. And that match was played in Croke Park, of course, and it's also known as the Thunder and Lightning final because the weather that day was absolutely atrocious. It was played in terrible wind and rain and thunder and lightning conditions. The players wanted the match cancelled, but the referee and the officials persevered. And in fact, one of the Kilkenny players, James Phelan, he scored a goal in 3 or something that day. He recalls that the rain fell so hard that the black and amber from his jersey seeped into his white shorts. Kilkenny won that day, and I suppose it will always be tied to this event of enormous international significance. And a lot of the players actually just found out about the announcement of World War II at Mass that morning. A lot of the players went to Mass just off Mountjoy Square, nearby Croke Park, so that's where they found out the news. This is another object that looks very ordinary, but it honestly really stopped me in my tracks. It's from Cavan County Museum, and it's a souvenir of Cavan's win in New York. They won the All-Ireland football final against Kerry in New York in 1947, and on that team was a man called PJ Duke. And he was a young man, he was only in his early 20s when he was playing on that team. And on their last night one of their last nights in New York, the team had a celebration in Hotel Empire. So PJ got people to sign this napkin from Hotel Empire. And so you have people saying, God bless Cavan, and remember that night in the Hotel Empire, and they're writing their addresses so they can stay in touch. So a very ordinary object. But 2 or 3 years after that famous win for Cavan, PJ Duke died of tuberculosis. I think he was only about 24. So suddenly this napkin is changed from a souvenir of celebration to a souvenir of someone that's gone. And that's often what happens with objects. Their meaning changes when the people that own them are no longer with us. And we all have these objects at home. Might be a piece of jewellery, a piece of furniture, a piece of clothing. We all have these objects that have a very special emotional connection to us, but they mightn't mean as much to anybody else but ourselves. This is one of my favourite objects I collected. They're a pair of goggles owned by a man called John Doyle, and he played for County Clare in the 1930s. He captained the team to an All-Ireland final, but he was a glasses wearer, and of course there was no helmets in the 1930s, so John Joe was fed up of his glasses getting broken, so he made these goggles out of bicycle spokes, a medical bandage and elastics. So he used to wear them over his glasses, and found a photograph of him on the left meeting President David De Valera on All-Ireland Day, and then a couple of years later, or many years later, fashioning them for a newspaper. John Joe died just a few years ago, well into his 90s, and he affectionately became known as John Joe Goggles Doyle, and still is today. And I'm delighted to say that the goggles are on display in the National Museum of Ireland in Collins Barracks in the exhibition that's based on my book. It's called GAA People, Objects and Stories, and it's loosely based on the book. There's not 100 objects in it, but there is about 25 objects in total. About 10 of them are from the book. So I suppose when I started on this project, I was always very hopeful that it would transcend beyond the pages of the book, and I'm delighted to say that it's now an exhibition in Collins Barracks, which is right beside Houston Station in Dublin. So if you happen to be up for a match or for anything else, do drop in, it's free. On the left-hand side there you'll see John Joe's goggles on display alongside Ursula Jacobs' Camogie helmet and Brian Cody's baseball cap, another iconic object of the GAA. And speaking of headgear, This is what's believed to be the first helmet that was worn on a hurling pitch in the 1960s by a man called Micheál Murphy, who's from County Cork, and his club was UCC. And Micheál suffered a head injury himself when he was playing hurling. So he took it upon himself to find a helmet that he could wear in the pitch. So this is actually a motorcycle helmet with the cushioning inside. And he first wore it, I think, in 1966 when he came on as a sub in a club game. I think it was a county final. So you can imagine the whisperings around the ground as this fella came on wearing a helmet for the first time. But it's hard to believe that they only became mandatory in 2009. So there's actually, and in fact, it was an injury on the biggest of stages on All Ireland hurling day, on All Ireland final day in the 1970s, when a Kilkenny man, Tommy Walsh, lost his left eye in the All Ireland hurling final. That kind of finally sparked the conversation, but it's hard to believe it took so long for them to become compulsory. This, again, another object that's terribly boring to look at, but when you read it and get into the nitty-gritty of it, it's an amazing piece of history. It's a letter from Offaly football manager to his players after they drew in a league semi-final with Kildare, and the manager wrote it or typed it up and sent it to his players the day after, and it's 2 pages long. The whole letter says, are you ready for the replay? Are you going to give your everything? Like, just kind of questioning them and trying to motivate them. But there's also, like, I suppose now you just send a WhatsApp message. So I suppose it's a form of communication that we don't really use anymore. But to me, one of the most fascinating things in it was his suggestions for training. So I'll read out a couple of them. Number 1, train 4 or 5 days per week for about 3/4 of an hour. If you could manage it, do an hour in the morning and another at night. Beware of doing too much in one day and then nothing for the rest of the week. Number 2, training should be geared towards speed, stamina, and sharp reflexes. Number 3, be careful of your diet. Cut out rubbishy sweets, etc. I recommend a raw egg and a glass of milk every day at 11 o'clock. Number 4, try to cut down on smokes and drinks, and give yourself a chance by getting as much sleep as you can. Early nights are much better than late mornings. And then he goes on to describe how you should stretch and do intermittent training. So, like, a lot of the stretching and stuff that he's describing is basically Pilates and yoga. So a fascinating window into the inner workings of an inter-county team. This was a great story to collect as well. It's a lead of football from the 1943 All-Ireland final. Roscommon's first All-Ireland win. They won 2 in a row, and they never won Sam Maguire since. But captain on that day for Roscommon on both those days for Roscommon was Jimmy Murray, who was from Knockcrockery in County Roscommon. It's about 15 minutes outside Athlone. And Jimmy's family owned the local shop, hardware, pub, and undertakers. So he was a very public figure in the community. He'd be meeting lots of people all the time. And in 1943, he took the match ball and proudly hung it from a shoelace and put it over his bar in the village. But in 1990, the pub went on fire, and it damaged most of the lounge and a good chunk of the front bar. But when the fire brigade arrived, the fireman went in, grabbed the football, threw it out the door, and then started fighting the fire. So he knew the football was there. It got charred a bit, but it was saved. So an amazing piece of GAA folklore that has taken on its own story, and the fact that it still survives today. Jimmy died a couple of years ago, but they are erecting a statue in his honour in his village to mark the achievements of that team. So this is a gold key that was from the opening of Clayton Park in 1953. It was presented to the Archbishop, whose name escapes me now, but there was lots of pageantry during the opening of Clayton Park. There was a football and a hurling match. There were actually what I found interesting was they brought soil from Semple Stadium in Thurles and from Croke Park and integrated that into the fields in Clayton Park. And like that, they used a lot of equipment and stuff from the local area. So a lot of the steel for the stands was from a disused airplane hangar in County Fermanagh. So it seems like a great day altogether, and hopefully we'll see more great days ahead there in the time to come. This is another amazing piece of GAA folklore. It's a hand-knitted cardigan, and it's in the Merrion Museum, and it was knitted by a woman called Philomena McGee. And God, I'd love to be around when Down won in the 60s. It sounded like great crack. And they're actually the first, when they won the third All-Ireland in '68, they had a civic reception in City Hall around the corner. But to mark those achievements, Philomena made this cardigan with a zip at the front to mark Down's achievements. And her family donated it to the Merrion Museum in 2019. I often think about people like her, like sitting to make the knitted cardigan in the 1960s. I'd imagine not even dreaming that it'd make its way into a museum, into a book, and now been presented in this way. So I hope she's happy with it. She lived, she worked, and she died in Newry. So it's wonderful that her story and her connection to Down GAA is still very much alive. This is a handmade press pass, and it belonged to a woman called Doreen McBurku. And she was a broadcaster on RTE Radio and Gaeltacht in the 1970s. And she went to GAA matches and she reported on them, and she went to all the matches on a Honda 50. And I suppose being a woman in broadcasting in the 1970s would have been quite unusual, as would, or even more so, a woman in sports broadcasting. And Doreen faced many obstacles when she was just trying to do her work. Some people didn't believe that a female journalist would be working on GAA games. And one day she was in Semple Stadium trying to make her way to the media area, and one of the stewards stopped her and said, "Sorry, ma'am, this area is for the media." She said, "I am the media." And so she made this handmade press pass so that she could just show it to the stewards the next day. So it had the radio on the belt up the symbol, and just the thought of her sitting down with her glue and her scissors, trying to make this press pass just to do her job. Thankfully, we've lots of women broadcasting in GAA, and it's not such an unusual sight. And people like Doreen broke down those barriers for the women that are working in sports broadcasting today. This is a Puckfada marking stone from the Cooley Mountains that straddles the border of County Down and County Louth. Puckfada is probably one of the most primitive competitions within the GAA, in that it's been around since the 1960s, but its rules have changed very little ever since. It's the All-Ireland finals are played in August every year along a circuit on the Cooley Mountains. So it's a 5-kilometre circuit, and you puck the ball, or you qualify from your county first, and you puck the ball along the 5-kilometre circuit, and whichever player gets it in the least amount of pucks is the Puckfada champion. So around the 5-kilometre circuit, there are these permanent marking stones, and they're there all year round. that are marked along the circuit. They used to be painted white, but the local farmers got confused and started counting the stones as their sheep. So they ended up having to paint them yellow to stop the confusion. Actually, and Puck Fada used to be played on Whit Sunday every year, which was in Irish folklore, it was considered to be the unluckiest day in the year when the fairies would be around, and it was taken very seriously. Whit Sunday was, I think it was the 12th Sunday after Easter, so it's usually around June time, and the GAA wouldn't put any matches on Whit Sunday because for fear of injuries or other things happening. So the Puck Fada committee decided to have their Puck Fada competition on Whit Sunday because, of course, none of the players or supporters were at matches. So Whit Sunday, I don't think is really observed anymore. But Puck Fada has had like kind of an up and down history. Started in the 60s, I think stopped again in the 90s and was revived again. So it's still going strong. This is a centenary cairn from how do you pronounce it? Caliph? Caliph. Has to be the windiest place, one of the windiest places I've ever been in my life. Ben Darragh, GAA grounds there, and this is the cairn that the club made to mark the GAA centenary in 1984, and they took a stone or a pebble from every townland in the parish and created this centenary cairn to mark 100 years of the GAA. They also put a time capsule in it with photographs of the teams in the club and different information, newspaper cuttings, and the intention is that the capsule is to be opened in 2034 when the GAA is 150 years old. So that's creeping up on us. Yeah, as I said, the research brought me to corners of Ireland that I've never been, and I believe I've met. I don't know, was it the chairman or a member of the club that I met the day I visited to take the photo, but he told me it was possibly one of the only pitches in Ireland where he saw a goalkeeper scoring an own point because of the wind. So he went to kick the ball out, and the wind was so strong that he kicked it back over his own goal post. Another object from nearby. This was from Longkesh prison, and during the Troubles, it was Gaelic games weren't allowed to be played in prison, so many prisoners expressed their affiliation with the GAA in other ways, and this is an example of it through art and craft with a symbol of the hurls, the slitters, the shamrock, and the harp. So this object that's actually on display in Collins Barracks in the exhibition at the moment, but it's from the collections of National Museums or Northern Ireland. An object many of you may be familiar with, the John 3-7 sign, which I didn't know the story of until I looked into it. I thought it was a different person carrying this sign all the time, but it was the same person, a man called Frank Hogan, who was originally from Tipperary, but he found love in Limerick and spent his time there, and he followed Limerick hurlers and footballers all over the country, and he carried this sign with him. Frank was a very devout man, and he was a born-again Christian, and John 3-7 relates to a parable of the Bible. He used to have a sign that said John 3-16, but when people stopped him, it was taking them too long to recite it, so he changed it to John 3-7. So Frank died, I think about 2017, 2018, and his widow Morna distributed, he had about 3 or 4 signs on the go, and she distributed the signs to his neighbours and some friends that were interested, and one of those neighbours is Angus, who owns Bowles Pub near Tolman Park in Limerick, so that's proudly on their Riverside Terrace. This is an object that's in many GAA homes, a Cúl Camps backpack, and Cúl Camps are, for many children, it's the best part of their summer holidays. And for their parents as well, because they're gone for half the day. Cúl Camps were started in the 1980s on an ad hoc basis. In County Cork is the first the first record of a GAA camp for children that I can find. But they got so popular that the GAA actually have their own Cúl Camps department now. They have a couple of people dedicated just to Cúl Camps, which is a summer camp for children where they engage with Gaelic games. And when you sign up for Cúl Camp, you get a Cúl Camps backpack, a jersey, and a zip top. But you can't buy them in shops, so you're part of a very limited club if you have the Cúl Camps gear. And in 2019, Wexford GAA were the first held the first Cúl Camps for autistic children. So it's wonderful to see the GAA expand in this way and be more inclusive to people of different abilities, including wheelchair hurling, which is a wonderful initiative that was started in 1998 by a man called Tim Marr. And like a lot of things, ideas just come from one person that has a lot of get up and go. And Tim Marr was one of those people. He was a teacher in a school for children with special needs in Baldoyle in County Dublin, and his children were playing. The children in the school were playing a tennis match. He said, "Well, if they can play tennis with rackets, they can play hurling in their wheelchairs." So he got 20-inch hurls made, and he started a competition of wheelchair hurling between schools in Dublin that expanded to schools in Leinster and then across the country. So there are All-Ireland finals of GAA hurling and camogie held every year, and the winners get their All-Ireland medal presented to them by Uachtaráin Cumann Luke Scale, by the president of the GAA, just like every other All-Ireland winner. And I had to include it in the book because I have a very special person in my life who is a wheelchair user, and I wanted him to be able to see himself in the book and to see his sport in the book as well. He's 11 years of age. His name is Aina, and he hopes to be a wheelchair hurler. He's just coming out of brain surgery at the moment, so right now. So keep him in your thoughts. This is another wonderful object that I uncovered in County Antrim in Lochiel. Some of you may know Bobby McElhatton, who is one of those collectors of GAA memorabilia. And this is a tweed camogie dress that was worn by one of the players on the Antrim team in the 1960s, who stopped the Dublin camogie team winning 11 All-Irelands in a row. It's made of tweed, so an incredibly heavy material, and like a lot of the uniforms in women's sports history, the priority is with covering up rather than prioritizing the athlete's needs and their comfort. And it's so annoying to still see that with the skirts and that ridiculous rejection of the will to wear shorts by the players, and see that rejected by voters at Camogie Congress is just, sometimes we're still back in the 1960s. But anyway, Bobby had this dress in his collection, and I borrowed it when I was going on the Late Late Show to promote the book. And I spoke about it with Ryan Tuberty at the time. And a day later, the Gilroy family got in touch with me, and they said, our Maeve Gilroy wore number 4, that's her dress. So Maeve is still, she's in her 90s, and the Gilroy family kindly lent me some photographs of Maeve's career. She had a very successful career with that Antrim team. She was Player of the Year. She went on to become a very well respected referee and coach, and she it's wonderful, you know, to see I feel like I've gone on a real journey with this object, from it being just, I suppose, a more generic story of a team to a more personal story, and to have these photographs to bring the story to life in this way is very rewarding. And in September 2019, the dress went on display, and we welcomed the Gilroy family to the exhibition. So we see them they're viewing it, which was a very emotional moment. So Bobby actually very kindly donated the dress to the collection, so it's now in our care, and we're very grateful for it. Speaking of uniforms, in the GAA's early days, there wouldn't have been very many jerseys. So in fact, a lot of teams would have just worn just whatever they had, and then maybe a sash to differentiate them from the other team. So this is a sash that's made its way across the Atlantic and back. It's from the Fermanagh Exiles team of the 1930s that were based in New York. And there's newspapers, when I was looking in the archives, there's calls for anyone from Fermanagh that was thinking of moving to New York to get in touch with the Exiles team. They won the New York Championship in the 1930s. So I suppose the Irish diaspora around the world have a very strong voice in the book and within the GAA as well. So this is, speaking of jerseys, this is I suppose the now iconic black and amber of the Kilkenny teams. This is the minor hurling team in 1957. With the jerseys not in great nick, like you can see them torn down the front, and that was before the match. But the man on the standing on the left hand side in the suit there, that man is my grandfather, John Lonergan, on my nan's side, on the Kilkenny side, and he was a selector on that team, and he died in 1968. So Mam was very young. We don't know much about him aside from the things that we found out through things like GAA archives and GAA journals and match programs and stuff. In fact, the only reason we even have a photograph of him is because of the GAA and the teams that he's standing beside. But when he died in 1968, Kilkenny GAA decided to have a trophy in his memory, and money was collected, and it was advertised in the newspaper after he died that we're collecting, and that we have this memorial trophy. And when I was writing the book, I write about it in the introduction, about how I was traveling to other people's houses and to museums and private collections, and people were able to show their very precious objects and their very precious family heirlooms. And we unfortunately don't have anything belonging to my grandfather. As I said, we're even lucky to have an image of him. And I really lamented that the trophy wasn't around. You know, it was the trophy came about in the 1960s. It's a long time ago. It's very unlikely that it's still around. So when I was doing promotion for the book, I was on the Ray Darcy radio show on RTÉ Radio 1, and Ray picked up on the story of my grandfather and of the trophy, and he said, "We'll do a call out for the trophy." I said, "Ray, there's no point, like it was 1968, it's a long time ago now." But he persisted, and he said, "If anybody knows anything about it, please let us know." And then a day later, I got a phone call from someone in Kilkenny to say the trophy is still around, it's still doing the rounds, and I'm proud to say that in February last year, Kilkenny GAA retired the John Lonergan Memorial Trophy and handed it over to me and my family. So this is the 101st GAA object. So I leave it there. I think it's a nice way to end it, but thank you all so much, and Jeremy and Malcolm.
brilliant tour of a whole range of fascinating objects, and we all get knitting cardigans. And for bringing this wonderful object with you, and I'm sure people want to come up at the end and have a better look they can, and just fantastic for your family to get that. Yeah. So I'm Siobhán is happy to take a few questions if anybody has a question or a comment
or if you don't feel comfortable saying it to the room, I'll be around after.
Exactly, and she's very happy. I say books are available for sale. Very happy to sign books. So as I say,
can I just say thank you so much for an absolutely inspiring talk. And as a Fermanagh man, I'm always intrigued when I'm told something that I know absolutely nothing about, and I've never actually seen that image before, nor did I know that there are sashes. And I just wonder, did many other counties resort to that, or was that a one-off?
The sashes?
Yes.
No, that was a thing. That was a thing in the GAA's very early days, and it was all to do with not having jerseys. There's a fascinating history of jerseys alone in the GAA, and I suppose it was all to do with what was available to them. When jerseys became more widespread, they were like heavy hand knitted ones, just knitted by local women in the area. But as time went on, they got more kind of uniform and formalized. But certainly in its early days, you would have seen a lot of that. Just unfortunately, I don't think too many of them survived. So it's great that does now. There's lots of holes and stuff in it, as you can see. But like it made its way across from New York, which is good going. But yeah,
still there. Have retained the green and white.
Yeah. There you go. There's another fascinating stories of the colours, which is I've done a bit of work in it, but it's very tough to research, especially when you're working with black and white images, trying to find out the colours. But yeah, glad to give you some new information.
I have to say that we were lucky to get anything of what we might have happened. So fresh, like the history.
Yeah.
And the many of us were rotated, and we would always belong to one John, and people playing for me.
Yeah. Programs or slitters or whatever. Yeah. But it's people like him that we really need in the GAA. Like I remember what match were we at Alva, Lockheed and Cushendall were playing in a county semi-final there about 2 years ago, and there was a minor match on beforehand, and Bobby was out straight after that match getting the slitter. But that's what you need though. The GAA Museum aren't doing that, and that's what's important to me as a curator and as someone that's collecting on behalf of the nation, is that we need to collect the present as well. So we need to be getting Conor Glass's boots now when they're just a piece of equipment, rather than in 30 years' time when he's retired, or maybe he'll still be playing football. But we need to get them now rather than in 30 years' time when he's more precious over them. Or we've seen that a lot with like there's a massive market for GAA memorabilia. There's auction. The money that medals and Bloody Sunday tickets are going for is in the thousands and thousands. So there's a big market for it as well. It's a very lucrative.
Well, here you'll be lucky to get
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'll keep in touch with Bobby.
Did you put out a call for the objects, or with your own knowledge search them out?
Yeah, there was a call. Yeah, I did a call on radio. I suppose my starting point would have been local museums. That was always where I started, because that's where there's a lot of local knowledge. But I suppose Ireland is so small. If I went somewhere to collect one story or one object, I'd come out with 5 of them, because John knows Eileen and Eileen knows James, and suddenly people started getting to know about the project as well. And I did go to great lengths of making sure that every county was included. But like I collected 250 stories, obviously only 100 of them made the book, so there's room for another couple of volumes yet.
I'll let Merrion Press go.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, they know.
I'm sure. As I say, thanks for, I'm sure you're getting the feeling that everybody in the room thoroughly enjoys that, and just terrific. And the book's available. We look out for the new book in 2025. Thank you very much.
Thanks a million.
Thank you.